And I keep hearing the Iranians have got no good options, but they have got a lot of options to disrupt the world economy and indeed inflict damage on US targets, haven't they?
They do. They have a lot of options. Unfortunately for Iran, they will all have negative blowback for their own economy or political stability as well. So it's kind of choosing your way through the quagmire, if you will. I think we could see, just to think about two potential scenarios. One is the low intensity retaliation. Iran will want to retaliate. I can't imagine really that Iran will come back to the negotiating table without having some sort of symbolic response to this really kind of fundamental attack that they've at the receiving end of. If they were to target an asymmetric sort of attack, as you've been speaking about, or if we were to see some attacks from Iranian-backed proxies in the region, who they don't control outright, but we could potentially see that kind of happening, through the side door. The Houthis in Yemen, for example, could target shipping lanes in the Red Sea, or the Strait of Hormuz, of course, is something on the table. That would be something that would send a message, but not necessarily derail kind of the track with the global economy that we've seen so far. Yeah.
Yeah, Cailin, just who can not have seen that extraordinary interchange between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, some of the most extraordinary rounds of questioning I've seen. Do you think the US political establishment is on board with this, or actually is horrified at the fact that the US, now we have to be very careful what language you use, is not in the war, hasn't declared war, but has perhaps joined the side of the Israelis in this war as well? The line is that the US is very good at starting wars, but not so good at ending them as well. Are you very concerned about what happens next from a US point of view?
Absolutely. And I think the different factions of the US policy environment will also be concerned. The kind of traditional MAGA, if you will, America first, have no obligation on the global stage. These components of Mr. Trump's base will be very much wanting a reassurance that the US has no long-term stake in this fight. But we have seen the more hawkish voices come into the ascendant recently, kind of preceding this attack, and being a lot more vocal on the stage. And I'd caution to say that the Trump administration is not isolationist. It has conflicting strains of isolationism and interventionism. And we're seeing that interventionism take the kind of upper hand at the moment. Now, ultimately, I think Trump would like to extricate himself after this one overwhelming show of force. But the next few days will tell if that is going to be possible.
Cailin, good morning. It's Juliana here. Let me shift you back to the Iranian side of things here and ask you who can come to Iran's side here and aid Iran in its response. Obviously, it's got close ties with Russia. Iran has been helping President Putin in terms of weapons in its fight against Ukraine. We know that the Iranians are going to be speaking to the Russians this week. But what exactly could Putin offer here? And if not Russia, does Iran have anybody else on its side?
I think ultimately Iran needs a response that inflicts kind of an answer from the US and its allies, but it doesn't fully escalate. Because again, Iran is in a uniquely kind of dangerous position here, with the regime going to be trying to hold on and just stay in place. So anything too strong in terms of reaction, and I would quantify that in terms of a clear Russian involvement would be an escalation the US would consider, I think, in terms of its response, and would send us again onto a more escalatory track. So perhaps quiet support, one that doesn't kind of show that Iran is forming a group of allies there, would be something that would be an option. I think here we have to think about proxies as well, because again, this is an arm that Iran has relied on to be active in the region previously, and we could see more of that. It wouldn't necessarily be seen as a widening of the conflict, which Russia might.
Cailin, let me piece this together for the impact on the world economy, because so far we've got a somewhat nuanced reaction, and that's from the likes of Goldman Sachs as well, expecting some sort of supply shock risk that has risen, but not talking about a state of affairs yet that there's a strong oil price problem for the world economy. We've got central banks last week that were looking at weakening growth and lower inflation, enough so they felt the need to cut rates. What are we talking about here? If the uncertainty is prolonged and we've got an oil price that is higher for longer, what is that going to do to really challenge economies globally?
Well, we have, as you just said, we've seen all of the measures that we'd be looking at jumping up. So oil prices have soared. They came back a little bit from their immediate knee-jerk reaction, which is encouraging. It suggests that we're in a sort of a wait to see what happens rather than an escalatory trend for prices that's going to show no sign of abating. That was a bit that I took from the news this morning. That was a bit encouraging. But everything has moved from a very low baseline, which sort of mutes the degree of change that we've seen. So the US dollar strengthened, not massively, but just enough off of its low base to suggest that we are really heading into a more risk-averse scenario. Oil prices are up, not massively. We're only at $80 a barrel when they were at their peak earlier this morning. We have to remember that's from quite a soft base over the course of the last couple of weeks when the global economy was more concerned about rising trade barriers from the US, shifting the US and global economies into a slower growth momentum, and was weighing on all of those assets. So we've seen a relatively muted response, but we have to remember that was from recession fear territory. So it's still quite a strong reaction, and we could see more of that room to run today, tomorrow, and in the following days.